The first U.S. casualty of war. Puerto Ricans call for an end to more than 50 years of U.S. bombings of their island as U.S. warplanes trained for Kosovo kill a civilian on the small island of Vieques.
Was the killing of a Puerto Rican civilian by U.S. jets training for Kosovo an accident waiting to happen, or just the latest mishap in the Navy's 60 years of bombings, shellings, and strafings on the island of Vieques?
We'll talk Puerto Rico in an unprecedented uproar over the U.S. Navy's training missions.
I have bombed those targets out there personally in an A-6 Intruder. I know what the requirements are to train an aircraft carrier battle group to go overseas. And I can tell you that there are no alternatives to Vieques.
Based on what I've heard through media, the recent death of a civilian guard has not been the only impact that the U.S. Navy's military training has had on the island of Vieques. Allegedly, health and the environment have been seriously affected too. I feel the need to fully inform myself regarding the authenticity of these allegations. For this reason, I've decided to go there, and the quest begins now. September 19. Upon my arrival at San Juan International Airport, I see a photo of Ricky Martin saying, "Welcome to my Puerto Rico." It's a very important moment for the Puerto Rican nation. For the past 3 days, some of the recently released Puerto Rican political prisoners serving sentences in the U.S. for acts related to Puerto Rico's independence struggle have started arriving on the island after being in jail an average of 19 years. Parallel to that festivity, people have taken to the streets of San Juan to celebrate Puerto Rican boxer Tito Trinidad's victory over Oscar de la Hoya less than 12 hours earlier.
Crazy life, but she'll take away your pain like a bullet to your brain.
Puerto Rico is an island nation in the Caribbean. It is composed of 5 islands, of which the main one carries the nation's name. Off the east coast of Puerto Rico are Vieques and Culebra, while Mona and Monita are located off Puerto Rico's west coast. Although Puerto Rico never became a profitable colony for Spain, shortly after the island's first sighting, in 1493, the Spanish crown became aware of the importance of Puerto Rico in transatlantic trade due to the island's strategic location in the Caribbean. By 1508, the first Spanish settlement was established on the island, and in 1521, that settlement was moved to the islet of San Juan, next to the ocean and away from mosquitoes, to become what to date has remained to be the capital of Puerto Rico, the city of San Juan. Today, San Juan remains Puerto Rico's most important city with about 1/3 of the island's population. With its beautiful white sand, warm water beaches, its predominantly good weather all year round, its welcoming people, its rich history and culture, Puerto Rico became the almost perfect Caribbean vacation spot.
While the cultural and architectural beauty of San Juan make me want to stay here forever, I know that more about Puerto Rico remains to be seen. For that reason, I hit the road and leave San Juan late in the afternoon. My destination, Lares.
September 23rd. Thousands of people have gathered in the town of Lares to celebrate the 131st anniversary of what's been considered the first Puerto Rican attempt to gain independence, better known as El Grito de Lares. This year's Grito de Lares celebration is dedicated to the recently released Puerto Rican political prisoners and to the people of Vieques for their widespread effort to reclaim the 2/3 of the island that has been used by the U.S. Navy for military practices for over 50 years. Vice President of the Puerto Rican Independence Party, Fernando Martin.
I think that's very healthy. I think that the important thing is that there be harmony within diversity. Because after all, different groups take different approaches to the problem, and that's, again, perfectly legitimate. The important thing is that when we can identify areas in which we can work together on specific acts, or in the United Nations, as we did this past July and obtained an excellent resolution, or in the struggle for freeing the political prisoners, in those areas we have no contradiction, so we can work together.
On July 6th, the United Nations Decolonization Committee reiterated that Puerto Rico constitutes a Latin American and Caribbean nation with its own unequivocal national identity, and reaffirmed the inalienable right of the people of Puerto Rico to self-determination in conformity to the UN General Assembly's resolution of December 1960. The committee also encouraged the U.S. government to end military maneuvers in Vieques and to release Puerto Rican political prisoners. Weeks later, President Clinton announced that he would grant clemency to some of the Puerto Rican political prisoners serving sentences in federal jails in the U.S. Eduardo Villanueva, president of the Puerto Rico Bar Association, a key organization in the release of the political prisoners, comments on President Clinton's decision.
He was acting, defending the interest, the vital interest of the United States. Remember that he was receiving a great pressure from the international community, and the United States tried to appear in other parts of the world as the defender of the human rights. He has the obligation to be consistent.
So if he's trying to act as a defender of human rights, what do you think is going to happen with the situation in Vieques?
There he has a great problem because he is between the pressure of the military interests of the United States and between the pressure of to be a real defender of the human rights. And we have 9,000 American citizens in Vieques suffering the intervention of the Marines. I think that Clinton, to be consistent, should order that the Marines go away of Vieques.
21 miles long from east to west and 4 miles at its widest point, Vieques has a surface of 52 square miles and a population of roughly 9,300. In 1941, the U.S. Navy expropriated approximately 2/3 of the land in Vieques and relocated its inhabitants on the remaining third of the land in the middle of the island. For decades, the Navy has been using the eastern end of the island for live ammunition military exercises, where, according to Viequenses, there has been use of napalm and, more recently, depleted uranium.
The energy is high. As people shout their demands in unison, thousands of Puerto Rican flags wave in the plaza. It is now Ismael Guadalupe's turn on the stage. Ismael spent 6 months in jail in 1979, one of the many protesters arrested on Navy land in Vieques who are demanding precisely the same thing as today, that the Navy leave Vieques.
Nosotros, en el caso de Vieques, reconocemos a nuestra aportación.
We, in the case of Vieques, recognize our contribution because it's a reflection of that same situation that happened here 131 years ago. In the past, it was here where Puerto Ricans were against the Spaniards, and now in Vieques we find ourselves, again the Puerto Ricans, against the new invaders in this Puerto Rican land, and we're going to win. For years we have been prisoners of attacks with bombs and ships that have frightened the people of Vieques. We are prisoners of those who poison the environment, those who contaminate our environment, of those who have had a major role in making our population sick and holding one of the highest cancer rates in all of Puerto Rico. And all this because we are prisoners of those who have the political control of this country. There are those who see the ships of the Navy as if they were the representation of their fleet. Our fleet is that of the humble fisherman that stops in front of their ships. Our army is not that army. Our army are the fighters of Vieques, those who are clandestine, those that fight openly because they defend the Puerto Rican country.
On April 19th, a stray bomb from a Navy warplane missed its target, causing the death of civilian guard David Sanes during what was a routine military training in the U.S. Navy base of Vieques. The accident was only the latest in a series of accidents that have taken place over the last 50 years. Triggered by the guard's death, protesters established camps on the Navy's training range. Since then, thousands of people have visited the camps and supported the struggle, causing the Navy to stop its training operations. Archaeological evidence shows that Puerto Rico was inhabited for approximately 4,000 years before the Spanish arrived on the island. As a newly discovered territory, Puerto Rico became a colony of Spain from 1492 until 1898, when, following the Spanish-American War, Puerto Rico was ceded to the United States as war booty. During the first centuries of colonialism, Puerto Rico developed its own identity. With time, this translated into requesting greater autonomy in local affairs from the Spanish crown. Because Puerto Rico remained loyal to the Spanish crown during the time in which Spain was losing its colonies and territories in the New World, Spain rewarded Puerto Rico by granting greater autonomy to the local government. But Puerto Rico barely got to savor the taste of being an independent nation. On July 17, 1898, the first autonomous government's legislature convened. 8 days later, U.S. Navy ships landed on the island. The war that erupted between Cuba and Spain provided the United States with an opportunity to engage itself in the conflict. The prize was Puerto Rico, as the United States had realized the importance of having territories in the Caribbean in order to fortify its presence in the emerging New World Order, specifically in Latin America. Puerto Rico's first U.S.-imposed military governors considered Puerto Ricans an inferior ethnic group and began Americanizing Puerto Rico. After all, the United States had gone to the island to provide protection and bestow upon the Puerto Ricans the blessings of the liberal institutions of the American government, as U.S. General Nelson Miles stated upon landing in Guanica Bay. That event marked the beginning of a century-long and painful relationship between the Puerto Rican people and the U.S. Navy. Several measures were used in order to convert Puerto Ricans into Americans, including the compulsory teaching of English and the conversion of an undervalued peso to U.S. dollars. In time, resentment grew since after centuries of struggle, Puerto Rico had gained more freedom from Spain than what the new U.S.-imposed military regime now offered Puerto Ricans. In 1917, Americanization acquired a new dimension, and just before the U.S. declared war in Germany, Congress granted U.S. citizenship to Puerto Ricans. With that new bond between the two nations, the U.S. government was able to draft Puerto Ricans for World War I. In 1948, the U.S. finally allowed Puerto Ricans to vote for their own governor. Later, due to international pressure, the United States and the newly created Puerto Rican government redefined the relationship between the two nations. The result was the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. By performing this political maneuver, the United States cleaned up its record at the United Nations and got Puerto Rico off the colonial nations list. That relationship continues today, forcing Puerto Rico to comply with all U.S. federal laws and regulations, but without giving Puerto Ricans representation in the U.S. Congress and without allowing Puerto Ricans to vote during the presidential elections of the country that continues determining the island's internal affairs, the United States of America.
It is September 26th, and people have gathered in the plaza of the town of Barranquitas. From here, a caravan in support of Vieques will depart to go to the towns in the central area of the island. A Vieques flag will be given to each town, where the flags will be raised until the Navy leaves Vieques. Mayor of the town of Barranquitas, Francisco López.
I understand that there is a just cause in which we all should unite as brothers, to fight for what it really means to be human, as all people have the right to live in peace. And I tell you from the bottom of my heart, from my being, that I am totally committed to this cause. On this historic morning in our country, I want to reiterate that I am prepared to suffer the ultimate consequences, because we know that this isn't a question of political parties. It's a question of human dignity. That's what it's all about. Thank you so much, and it is with much pleasure and with much respect that we receive the flag of our dear brothers and sisters of Vieques.
Although I'm miles away from Vieques, the support and sympathy shown by the people of the towns in central Puerto Rico for the people of Vieques is outstanding. With flags waving from every car and horns honking, the caravan lets its presence be known as it drives through the curvy, narrow roads of the Puerto Rican mountain range. I go with the caravan through the town of Comerío and continue with it as far as Naranjito. Now, I must start heading towards my next destination, the island of Vieques. Monday, September 27th. Upon my arrival in Vieques, I see the smallness of the town and experience the friendliness of its people. I walk around its streets and arrive at the town's plaza, where school kids are freely playing and walking around during recess.
¿Cuál es tu nombre?
Juan.
Juan?
El mío, Emanuel. El mío, Franja. El mío, Javier. Carlos. Marielis. Kiabet.
¿Ustedes qué opinan de la Marina?
Que se vaya. Que se vaya. Que se vaya.
What do you think of the Navy?
That they should leave.
And why do you want it to leave?
Because they're bad, and they're causing a lot of harm to Vieques.
They're causing a lot of damage.
How has the presence of the Navy here in Vieques affected you?
It kills people, and then it throws the bombs in the sea, and they poison all the fish and contaminate the little island of Vieques.
If it doesn't leave, I'll take it out.
What else happens?
The environment, the fauna and flora.
And then they set off bombs and we get contaminated.
And they can wound and kill others, even more people.
And if they land in the kiosk, they can kill those who are in the kiosk.
Or look, the bomb can fall on top of a house.
And it can fall on top of the school.
So what would be the best way to get rid of them?
Telling them sincerely to leave Vieques because they are affecting us a lot.
That they leave Puerto Rico and go to the United States since they are millionaires.
So Vieques isn't part of the United States?
No. And also Bill Clinton is waiting for them there with much affection, love, and one of Monica's tobaccos.
If you could all say something that the whole world could listen to, what would it be?
Navy out of Vieques.
Navy out of Vieques.
Navy out of Vieques.
Tuesday, September 28th. The day for going to the protest camps has finally come. It is early in the morning, and I'm riding in a small boat, as it's practically the only means of reaching the camps. As we start approaching the eastern tip of Vieques, where the Navy's live ammunition training takes place, I see some of the most beautiful beaches I've ever seen. Finally, after a close to half an hour boat ride, we arrive at the Cayo Yaji camp.
My name is Hector Ivan Mercado, and I've been here, or we've been here as a collective in the Cayo Yaji since May 18. This was like 2 weeks after the accident of the death of David Sanes. And I would like the world to know the reason that I'm here and all my companions are here is to protest the presence of the U.S. Marine in Vieques. And definitely we want them out of Vieques. They've been here for about 60 years, and the whole Vieques is saying no more to the U.S. Marine, and we want them out now.
The Navy has used Vieques for training practices an average of 180 days per year. During these practices, the Viequense population, living just a few miles from the live ammunition training range, has to cope with noise from constant warplanes and bombings. But as time has shown Viequenses, noise has not been the only thing they've had to live through. Carlos Ventura, a marine biologist and fisherman, tells more about this situation.
Nosotros tenemos contaminación por parte del bombardeo de forma directa.
We have direct contamination from the bombing because Vieques is a place where not only the Navy practices, but also countries of NATO come to carry out their maneuvers, because Vieques is rented out to all those countries to carry out their practices. This also includes that Vieques is used to test weapons by the world's arms manufacturers. In 1993, they were dropping napalm. They have shot off projectiles with uranium coating, known as depleted uranium. These types of contaminants, including those that are used in weaponry making, have actually been found in the potable water supply that the population of Vieques consumes. In 1978, some studies were done where they found RDX, they found residues of TNT, and heavy metals inside the water storage tanks.
In what form have those bombings affected the economy?
La Marina toma control o tiene control de 3/4 partes de la isla.
The Navy takes control or has control of 3/4 of the island. The island of Vieques consists of 33,000 acres of land, and the Navy controls 26,000 of them, preventing in this form the use of the best areas for fishing and access to the best places to communicate to the main island. The people of Vieques right now have to use a navigation route of 18 miles to have contact with the main island, when via the western part of Vieques it's only 5.5 miles away. But that route is there only for the Navy to have closer access from the Roosevelt roads to Vieques, and they don't let the people of Vieques use that route. Consequently, that increases the cost just to move people and materials to the island, as much for common and ordinary people as for possible developers who would want to come to the island of Vieques to help the economy.
I've been talking with Carlos Ventura for a couple of hours about the almost 60 years of Navy training on the island and the impact it has had on the people and the environment. Now, it's time for the tour around the firing range with Carlos and Hector Olivieri as my guides. It's here where the visual nightmare begins. I ask Carlos about what we're looking at. My camera is ready.
¿Y estos qué son aquí? ¿Qué estamos viendo aquí?
What are we looking at here?
See this plane here? It simulates an airstrip at an airport. There's this plane here, another there, and then these anti-aircraft guns that you see here that simulate the airport defense system. And they use them to simulate an airport, and they start to bomb both the airplanes and the machine gun, the anti-aircraft positions as well.
So there must be ammunition around here.
Yeah, there's lots. And if you approach the plane, you'll see that more holes won't fit in it. It looks like a colander. Yeah, let's go so you can see it. It can't hold anymore. See these bomb fragments over here? They're airplane bombs. Look at those, they're machine gun bullets. You'll be able to see how many holes the planes have. And you'll be able to see a little further on, although you won't notice yet, that in all of those hills that we now see in front of us, there are hundreds of unexploded bombs. Look in the hole in this plane. These are bullets that were shot from another plane. At least one bird has already made a nest here, a petite, and it already has chicks not long ago, and they have flown away. After the Persian Gulf War, they brought some equipment that they seized in the Persian Gulf, but it wasn't allowed into the United States because of fear that it might be contaminated with radioactive or chemical ammunition. They brought it here to use as targets. What if they were contaminated? Well, then it would have spread everywhere. And that is one of the reasons why they don't want to leave Vieques, because here they have broken all kinds of laws. They have caused so much destruction and know that if they leave here and studies take place, it will come out that they broke the laws that they themselves made, and that the Treasury Department will run a deficit to be able to pay the settlement. And that is why it's important for them to say that it is in the interest of national defense. What they don't want is for anyone to discover the monstrosity of what they have done. That is their fear.
During the early 60s, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara and President John F. Kennedy devised a plan to transfer all of Vieques' land to the Navy. This involved moving all the people out of Vieques and relocating them somewhere else. To guarantee that Viequenses would not need to go back to the island to light candles to their dead, the plan contemplated digging out the corpses too. But Puerto Rican Governor Munoz Marin and President Kennedy became aware of the international controversy that execution of the plan could generate. For that reason, according to Ronald Fernandez, instead of moving the population, the Navy would simply bomb them.
Este mangle siempre tiene la raíz, se me tira dentro del agua. ¿Oíste? Sin embargo, mira qué pasó con la laguna. Está seca. Completa.
This is a red mangrove tree. This mangrove has its roots in water. You heard that? Well, look at what happened with the pond. It is completely dry, and that is why the red mangrove is dying. Through this road, there was a hydraulic connection that crossed through here and led to the open sea. And when they built this road, well, they blocked up the hydraulic connection.
Primero de febrero del 90. De aquí, Carlos. Aquí al lado allá, Carlos. Mira, primero de febrero del 99. Ellos se pasan escribiendo las bombas y les dicen cosas.
What's this then? It's a bomb. Look, it says February 1st, 1999. If you pull here, you can see the date. Look. It's unexploded. This little thing is alive. Come, let's go towards the road.
Exploded and unexploded bombs, bullets, rockets, and many other types of weaponry lie on the ground by the thousands. The place is trashed and full of craters. Even in the areas where there is grass, I step into holes made by the bombings. I can't believe what I'm seeing. I simply feel like crying. There are so many craters that Carlos even makes a joke of saying that Vieques has more craters per square mile than the surface of the moon. He finally makes me laugh. Once we get to where the tanks are, Carlos points out to me the perforations that have been made to them with what he believes was depleted uranium. He compares those perforations to dents made by regular artillery that, as he points out, doesn't really make it through the thick metal walls of the tank.
Oh, listen, here's a bomb. Walk this way and don't step on it.
Where?
Here. You also have to be careful when you walk around.
In case there's anything?
Just in case there's something. Right, when you go to take photos, before you move to look for a position to take your picture, first look to see where you're going to put your foot.
Tienes que tener cuidado cuando vayas caminando.
Por si hay algo...
Sí, cuando vayas a tomar fotos, antes de moverte para buscar una posición para tomar las fotos, primero mira dónde vas a poner el pie.
Héctor Olivieri.
¿Te había imaginado que esto era así? No, ¿verdad? Por eso hay que venir. Esto es mejor que todo lo que nosotros podamos hablarte de esto. No que tú lo veas.
Did you imagine it was like this? You didn't, right? That is why you have to come here. This is better than anything we can tell you. What matters is that you see it. That's why when the press comes, North American press, television programs, you know, news shows, we bring them to ground zero. Let them see what has happened, and let them judge.
While the live ammunition training exercises take place on the eastern end of the island in an approximately 700-acre area, the Navy conducts military practices in a much greater area in the open sea. This outer range is hundreds of square miles of ocean. The inner range is all of the eastern area of the island of Vieques. The April accident that sparked this latest wave of protests was not the first one. On October 24, 1993, a Navy fighter jet missed its target by nearly 10 miles and dropped 5 bombs 1 mile away from the civilian population area of Vieques, where 4 of the bombs exploded.
We finally returned to the camp. I'm astonished by what I saw. I'm still in shock and have very little to say. Nonetheless, I decided to talk some more with Héctor Olivieri just before I leave for the day.
Nosotros tenemos altas tasas de desempleo, nosotros tenemos muchas enfermedades, sobre todo el cáncer debido a estas maniobras.
We have high unemployment rates, we have lots of diseases, above all cancer, due to the maneuvers, and there's no positive side to these war games that they have here. Each time that the war machine of the United States wants to try out a weapon, the ideal place is Vieques. Every time that the U.S. Navy wants to sell a new weapon, show it to other countries, well, they take our lands to bring European countries or sibling countries of Latin America and their armies to test out these new weapons. We want this to stop now. We don't see any use in any of this. They speak of their defense. We understand that there are other places, unpopulated places, where they can conduct their exercises. We feel that we have paid a very high price, an inflated price, and today we demand that our right to live free and to live in peace be respected.
The support to the Viequense struggle has come from all sectors of the Puerto Rican society. Among the supporters is Senator and President of the Puerto Rican Independence Party, Ruben Berrios, who has continuously been at the firing range since the wave of protests began. From the beginning of his arrival to the firing range, Berrios stated that he would not leave his camp until the Navy left Vieques. In June, as protests against the Navy intensified, President Clinton appointed a panel to look into the Vieques situation. The panel's recommendations are expected shortly.
Thursday, September 30th. I've decided to attend a religious service in the Monte David camp, the first protester outpost on Navy land. It emerged from Alberto de Jesus' decision to not leave the site where Viequenses had gathered to place a cross as a sign of protest right after Mr. Sanes' death.
Yo opino como sacerdote y como puertorriqueño.
Father Pedro Rafael Ortiz.
As a priest and as a Puerto Rican member of this Puerto Rican nation, I am of the opinion that the situation of Vieques is a problem of civil rights, of human rights. That has transcended the simple fact of the presence of the Marines that have occupied some land. The church has to go where people's rights are trampled, the fundamental rights of the individual. There, the church has to lift its voice to alert and define and help that human being to rediscover himself, to rediscover the path, and to demand that the oppressors abandon their evil destruction in order that together with the oppressor, in search of conversion, in order to become more humane in their power, and then together build the kingdom of God on earth. Therefore, I see this as a basic and fundamental problem at a theological level, a work of evil, a sin of social structure against the kingdom of God, and at a sociological level, I see it as a problem of human rights that have been tremendously lacerated.
Son tantas cosas, tantos sentimientos juntos.
Monte David camps, Pedro Zanon.
Creo que me inspira estar aquí el hecho de que creo en la
It's so many things, so many emotions mixed together. I think what inspires me to be here is the fact that I believe in liberty. I believe that every human being has a right to be free and that we are not the exception. For 60 years, we here on the island have been suffering under the military boot, and we are definitely tired. We are tired of being stomped on, and it is time to put a stop to it. This is why I am here, adding my grain of sand to build this movement, as all we Puerto Ricans have to do in order to get rid of the U.S. Navy war machine.
I'm on my way back to San Juan, and all I can think about is the outrageous violations of basic human rights that the Viequense population has had to endure for almost 60 years. I had no idea of what was truly going on here, of what I was going to see. This experience has changed me. I doubt I'll ever forget it. I keep asking myself, why has this been happening for so long? How can the Navy be so blatantly irresponsible about the contamination that Viequenses have been exposed to due to military training? I'm full of anger and confusion due to this frustrating situation. Even greater than those two emotions is the sadness I feel in my heart. Sadness because of what the people of Vieques have lived through for so long, as victims of the strongest military apparatus ever known in human history.
Cruza los mares, vio cómo creció Monón.
In Vieques in Puerto Rican history, Aurelio Tio wrote that the Navy expropriated Vieques as a direct result of the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor, which caused the loss of practically all of the American Pacific Fleet. Vieques was then to be used as a hidden naval base for the British and French fleets, although execution of that plan was never completed, as German attacks on Russia alleviated naval concerns. Nonetheless, the Navy kept the expropriated land and has used it for military maneuvers since then. But the struggle for the cessation of military practices in Vieques is not new. In the 70s and early 80s, island fishermen, with the support of the civilian population of Puerto Rico, demonstrated on Navy land demanding the departure of the Navy from Vieques. But Puerto Rican police, with support of federal law enforcement personnel, suppressed the protests. Many of the fishermen were jailed. While the detainees were in jail, a tragic incident occurred. Angel Rodriguez Cristobal, one of the many arrested on Navy land in Vieques, died in a federal jail in Tallahassee, Florida, under what was considered highly suspicious circumstances. The live ammunition firing range has exposed for years the Viequense population to the constant noise and very subtle shock waves from the bombings. These factors, among many others, have been linked to the high incidence of health and psychological disorders on the island. Epidemiologist Rafael Rivera Castaño talks about his findings.
One of the first things that I noticed right here was the high incidence of cancer in Vieques. So finally, we insisted with the health department to have a study done on the incidence of cancer in Vieques. And finally, in November 1997, they published a report in which they compared the cancer incidence in Vieques with the rest of Puerto Rico. And they found that by the end of the decade of the 80s, Vieques had a 27% higher incidence than the rest of Puerto Rico. We know from some studies done by the Navy that there's contamination of water with chemicals from the bombing, like nitrites, TRX, lead, products that we know they are carcinogenics. And studies done in the 80s by the Navy found that the water in Vieques, used by the civilians, were contaminated with all these chemicals.
From May 11 to 16 of 1978, the Navy collected soil and water samples from the firing range in civilian areas in Vieques. In August of that same year, the Navy's own studies revealed no essential difference in terms of explosive content of TNT, RDX, and Tetril between water and soil samples taken outside and inside the firing area. The death of David Sanes became the catalyst that has brought to the surface information that proves that the Navy has been in violation of state and federal laws regarding the use of illegal chemical weapons. Flavio Cumpiano, Washington-based lawyer and member of the Committee for the Rescue and Development of Vieques, talks about the recently released documents and how they confirm what the people of Vieques have been saying for many years.
It wasn't until this year that the Navy was forced to admit it. They were forced to admit their use of depleted uranium because the Military Toxics Project, which is a non-profit organization, filed the Freedom of Information Act request or petition, requesting from the Navy that it divulge or disclose the use of depleted uranium worldwide. And the Navy had to mention that, yes, indeed, as recently as last February, they used depleted uranium over Vieques, fired 263 shells, which, by the way, it's illegal. But they said, by the way, that was inadvertent.
The Navy's destructive impact has gone far beyond the effect that bombings have had on health and the environment. There have been economic ramifications as well. For the past 50 years, the Navy has controlled the development of the island with the goal of discouraging population and economic growth, as when it denied permission for the expansion of the fishermen's boat dock. Before the Navy's expropriation, Vieques had a prosperous economy that provided enough work for its inhabitants. It was mainly a sugar-producing island, though it also had cattle and other smaller crops such as pineapple. Just in 1922 alone, the three main sugar mills in Vieques produced 15,531 tons of sugar. Although the Navy did not expropriate the sugar mills themselves, it did take the land on which sugar was grown and cattle raised. Therefore, Vieques was suddenly left without the means of sugar production, leading to a catastrophic situation that left thousands of people without jobs.
Sunday, October 17th. I've returned to the Cayo La Gigi camp. The camp is honored with the visit of a person who has lived in Vieques since he was 6 months old. Juan Molina is now 94 years old. He worked as a sugarcane worker and fisherman. Today, he's come to the camp to see once more before he dies the land, the ocean, and the beaches where he used to fish and work when he was young. Don Juan's energy leads us to believe that there must be many years of life ahead of him, which will hopefully allow him to see his dream come true, to get the Navy out of Vieques. His words, energy, and attitude are very inspiring for all of us at the camp, as he shares with us stories from his youth.
Don Juan, ¿usted qué opina del hecho de que haya venido la Marina?
Lo que yo opino que se vayan.
Don Juan, what do you think about the fact that the Marines are here?
I think they should leave.
And why do you think they should leave?
Because I see little benefit from the Americans. Truthfully, little benefit. Because they took away our sugarcane. They took away our pineapples. They took away our factories. They took away our way of living. You can't go in there anymore. If they catch you, they put you in jail. You can't go unless they let you, not like before when we could go anywhere.
So then you want them to leave Vieques?
They should leave if they're not from here.
And when would you like to see this happen?
Tomorrow.
Along with other people, I go to the firing range, where I walk with scientist Neftali Garcia as he takes oxygen readings in the water that remains in the mangrove lagoons. I ask him about the environmental situation.
In terms of recovery, ecological recovery, has there been any?
Well, one can observe that it has rained during the past few months. There has been a recuperation of the vegetation, and you can notice it's greener, and also you can notice more small crabs, birds, and less erosion. So you could say that there has been some degree of initial recuperation, but you still have many bombs, heavy metals, and the remnants of burned vegetation, and so on.
So this ecological recuperation, is it due to the military practices?
Cessation, you mean?
Yeah, or is it because of the rainy season?
It's both. It has been a rainy summer, plus the fact that no explosions are taking place. If there were explosions, you would still see the craters and a burning of vegetation, and erosion problems and sedimentation problems in the lagoons.
Neftali is carrying a Geiger counter, and I decide to ask him about the presence of radiation in the firing range, specifically where the tanks are kept.
Yes. No. A moment. No. There is some degree small. One would have to find the exact place. I suppose they use this as a target. Probably they search every inch around here.
It is time now for Neftali to go back to the main island. But before he boards his boat, I ask him a last question.
So after these readings that we were just taking, what can you say regarding the presence of radiation?
Here and there, in two trips, one could see some increase in the intensity of radiation. But we have not done a thorough study of the whole area. As of now, I could not eliminate the possibility that there are remnants with higher radioactivity in other areas, but I will have to prove it.
(12:15), October 18th. A U.S. Navy helicopter arrives at observation point. 12:20. The sound of the helicopter gets louder and louder. Suddenly, I realize that the helicopter is flying right over us, and two people in the helicopter are holding what appear to be cameras. The helicopter flies low over us and continues towards the other camps. Visible at a distance, the helicopter continues flying over all of the areas where protester camps have been established. After a while, it heads back in the direction from which it originally came from, and peace returns to the camp after the tension caused by the helicopter dissipates.
Today, the presidential panel's decision on Vieques has been announced, and it has concluded that the Navy will continue using the land for 5 more years. However, it also suggests a decrease of the live ammunition practices to only 130 days per year, and an immediate 50% reduction of the live ammunition practices. While the panel suggests that the Navy look for an alternative site, it does not mention whether the Navy will be obligated to leave the island after the 5-year time frame. Among several other resolutions, the panel suggests that the Navy return to the local government the excess Navy land in Vieques, and that it dispatch a public health service team to investigate the higher cancer rate and act on its findings. The panel's decision is as uncomfortable as the news of the newly developed Hurricane Jose that threatens to hit Vieques and Puerto Rico within 48 hours. Jaji Camp member Andy Rivera.
The will of the majority of the Puerto Rican people is that the Navy stop their shooting, clean up, and get out. The president knows that that's the position of the government, the people of Puerto Rico. If the president don't accept the decision of the people of Puerto Rico, that's tyranny. Clinton and the U.S. government will be tyrants against the people of Puerto Rico. And we're going to be fighting tyranny here and any other place in the world.
But although the presidential panel's decision was shocking, it was not a total surprise for the people here in Vieques, as Bob Rabin, historian and member of the Committee for the Rescue and Development of Vieques, points out.
Well, the presidential panel's report is nothing historic. It's nothing new. It doesn't make history. It's a repetition of what historically the military has been saying for decades, that Vieques is so necessary they can't live without it, as if the U.S. military and our own country's national defense depends on this one small island. Obviously this isn't true, but they can certainly insist. What we hope is that the president makes the right decision, disregards the presidential panel's position as a panel that is definitely a military panel. 3 of the 4 members of the military, so they represent the interests of the military. So he's got to make a decision. Is he with the military machine, or is he with the people of Vieques? He's going to make that decision. History will judge him later, but the people of Vieques will not allow, independently of the decision made by the presidential panel, and independently of the decision the president might make, the people of Vieques will not allow another shot to be fired in Vieques. I have no doubt about that.
Tuesday, October 19th. As Hurricane Jose continues heading in this direction, Puerto Rico's governor, Pedro Rosselló, is in Washington testifying at Senate hearings on Vieques. Over the past few months, Rosselló has stated many times that the bombings are not negotiable and that they will not resume on Vieques. His stand has been echoed at all levels of the Puerto Rican government, including by Vieques' mayor, Manuela Santiago.
Nosotros no aceptamos la decisión del panel presidencial.
We don't accept the decision of the presidential panel. Although they have promised us that the Navy will leave in 5 years, the bombing of Vieques is not acceptable. The people of Vieques have already said no to the bombing. We have been bombed for 60 years, and we are no longer going to permit it. We are planning nonviolent civil disobedience. It's the only way to stop bombing. That has been done and proven effective.
But with all of the bad and stressful news of the last 24 hours, there is joy as well here in Vieques. In a few more minutes, Puerto Rican boxer Tito Trinidad will arrive on the island. Already, a few thousand people are waiting at the dock.
The time has come, and I now painfully depart from Vieques. I'm on the last ferry of the day, and perhaps the last one for a few days. The sea is getting rough, the wind is getting stronger, and heavy clouds are rapidly moving in. Tito Trinidad is also on board. My body leaves the island with me, but part of my heart stays here with them. Regardless of political beliefs or interests, one must look at the roots and nature of the situation in Vieques to truly understand it. One must break away from manipulative forces and seek the truth. The situation in Vieques is not a matter of politics. It's not a matter of money. It's not a matter of national security either.
It's a matter of basic human rights, the right to live in peace. Just think about it. How would you feel if this were being done to you? Or to the ones you love so much? To your family? To your children? Or to all of you at the same time? In your house? In your town? Or in your island? Do you think it's fair?
A todas las manos que hoy trabajan, porque ellas construyen y saldrá de ellas la nueva patria liberada.